Hey, Nina.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Good, thanks.
How's it going?
Oh, still here.
Yeah,
How about for you?
I've lost track of time.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm becoming very accustomed to it,
hmm
but I just finished like an 8-week teaching commitment, and it feels like it was a million years ago. And at the same time, it feels like it just raced by.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Anyone else coming on today?
I know Mary is.
Yeah.
I'm gonna see if Olivia's coming.
Now, are you here in northeastern Pennsylvania? Or are you?
Yeah, I'm in Wyoming.
Mhm. Have you been out and about at all?
Well, I have a dog, so I go for walks every day.
Yeah. Yeah, my dog has been so well walked. In fact, I think she's going to be in shock. And when I do go somewhere, like if I go to the grocery store, she looks at me with,
Mhm.
"What are you doing?"
Yeah. And she's a puppy. She's only a year and a half old, and she's already tired all the time now. And I'm like, well,
Yeah.
you're
Oh,
a puppy.
our pets are loving this.
Yep. It's gonna be a shock when I go back.
Yeah, I know, right? Huh.
They were saying on a lot of the like pet adoption places, um, to make sure like if you're getting a new puppy and everything, to like crate it and put it in a separate room for like a couple hours by itself so that they don't get separation anxiety when this is like because they only knew you being home all day.
That's a good tip.
Yeah.
I was just talking, my nephew is begging my sister to get a dog and using me as like, the interference, And, um, I need to keep that in mind because I think that she might do it.
hmm
And if she does, I have to tell her that. That's a really important tip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's good for like training and stuff if you're home all the time.
Oh my
But
gosh, they should have done it 9 weeks ago.
yeah.
Hi.
Hey, hi, how are you?
What's a good tip?
Getting a puppy. Like if you got a puppy 9 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Mary thought about it.
Yeah, I
I
did.
thought
too.
about it.
Yeah, I did too. And then I thought about what my life was like before this, and it was hard enough to take care of my current dog. So, but yeah, in terms of training and everything, could you imagine how much progress you would have made?
Yep.
Oh yeah, it was like the best. I swear everyone got a dog during this. Like every dog.
Chemo.
Yeah.
I'm good any day.
Hey, how are you?
Hi, Christine.
Doing good?
Hi, Nina. Hi, Mary.
We're just talking about adding animals into our lives during this global pandemic. How many people have done it?
Mhm. I come in and you talk about adding an animal.
Take the hint.
I don't know if that's good to be called an animal. Like some guys, that means like you're a big tough guy, like he's an animal. Or he's a dirty animal. Like
Well,
a filthy animal.
I'm glad to see all of you. I know. Did you have a big stuff going on last week?
I think it was just everybody had different things.
Yeah, it was everyone just happened to have like a meeting at the same time.
All little stuff that all happen at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, good. Well, I think you're going to like today's session. We're going to learn a little bit about neuroscience today. And I love this lesson. And I've actually been teaching this lesson now for about 2 weeks in different ways. And I've actually added a lot to it because I think that when we actually know the way that the brain is responding to some of these practices, we're more apt to actually do these things. Okay. So This is lesson 7. Lessons 5, 6, and 7 are all devoted to the mindfulness of feelings. And as I said, the lessons that come before lesson 5 really kind of prepare you to deal with the notion of feelings and emotions. And then our final lesson, lesson 8, is called mindfulness of mind, which is one of my favorite lessons. I think it's just a wonderful way to bring all of this to an end. But if you remember in lesson 5, if I could just highlight the hallmark of that lesson, it was really learning how to cultivate a high level of self-awareness about the things you're feeling. We talked about the nature of feelings, how we as human beings, especially if they're feelings we're not comfortable with, we want to resist them, or we might allow them to overwhelm us, or we just freeze and shut down. We don't want to feel them at all. So we can go into a paralysis or a denial. And really the point of that lesson, if you remember, we did that guided meditation where I asked you to think about where the feeling is located in the body, if it had a color, if it had a texture, if it had a size, what the edges were like. And that really connected us to that acronym RAIN, which is invaluable when you're dealing with something that comes up that you do want to resist or run away from or shut down to. Remember, RAIN, I recognize that this is here, whatever it is. A, I'm just going to allow it. I might not like it, but I'm just going to allow it. I'm going to get curious about it and I'm going to investigate it, much like a detective would investigate. And remember that investigation, as soon as I go into curiosity investigation mode, I'm able to separate myself from whatever that feeling is that's causing the discomfort. And then we can think about in 2 ways. One is, I'm just going to be very kind and nurturing to what's here, even if I don't like it. A more sophisticated view of N is non-attachment. I don't have to attach to that. I have the choice to know that it's here, but I'm not going to let this anger consume me. I'm not going to become it, and it's not going to become me. So that's the acronym of RAIN. So that was in lesson 5. The last time I saw you for lesson 6, we talked about what the difference is between reactivity and being responsive. And I hope that you've had a chance to think about the acronym SCARF. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And SCARF gives you insight into what triggers you and what triggers the people around you. It gives you keen insight into human beings. S, status. C, certainty. A, autonomy. R, relationship. And F, fairness.
Mm-hmm.
And I went into that in great detail. If you need a review of that, go back to that video, because again, when I learned SCARF, I think I mentioned this, I worked with it for a solid month. Every time I felt triggered, I took out my little cue card, I ran myself through it, and just knowing what's triggering you can help to diminish its power. And knowing what's triggering people around you helps you to better respond so that you don't get triggered, because that's what happens. When a person around us is triggered, it's like a contagion. We become triggered. It doesn't have to be that way. And then we talked about what it means to be responsive. And I sort of ended that lesson with those 2 lessons from Viktor Frankl and Edith Esther, both Holocaust survivors. And they really have come to share with us the power of responsiveness when we are dealing with horrific things, things that terrify us, things that feel unbelievably difficult. And in their case, the Holocaust. And part of how they survived with their sanity was making a decision that you can take everything from me, but the one thing you cannot take from me is my power to choose how I'm going to respond to what you're doing and how you're treating me. So responsiveness versus reactivity was the hallmark of lesson 6. So I'm going to bring my slides up because I want to share some things with you that I think you'll like. The hallmark of lesson 7 is compassion. In the Buddhist tradition, compassion is defined as a quivering heart in response to suffering. And I love that definition because if you can remember a time when you felt compassion for another person's suffering, it almost feels as if the heart is quivering. You're really touched and moved by it. A more formal definition of compassion is when I sense the suffering of another human being and I have a strong desire to alleviate it. When we are compassionate and when you are moved to compassion, it is because you have a willingness to open yourself up to another's suffering. And another powerful component of compassion is what we call shared vulnerability. 10 weeks ago, maybe even 6 weeks ago, we were seeing a lot of this. We were seeing human beings all over the planet witnessing this enormous suffering, all kinds of suffering, loss of life, loss of jobs, loss of routine, loss of just key components of our lives. And sharing that with others all over the globe, that there was something that was very comforting about the fact that I'm not alone. And it's not just that other people in my community are feeling this, other people around the whole planet are feeling this. So compassion requires a real softening. And when you are giving another person compassion, you will notice that you are very calm. And there's a reason for that. And that reason has everything to do with your neurology, your biology, your chemistry, and your hormones. That when we can step into compassion, it is a natural form of comfort and sedation. Sedation, yeah. I mean, it just is so soothing. So compassion is good for all of us. It is good for me to give it, and it's good for me to receive it. And it's a really important way that we can train ourselves to better manage feelings and circumstances that arouse feelings that feel really difficult for us. So here's the neuroscience of compassion. And this is what I found most recently to be fascinating about who we are in the human brain. When something happens that's really upsetting or causing a lot of discomfort, one of two things tends to happen for us whenever we feel like we are perceiving that there's a threat. One of two neurological systems kicks in. We know a lot about our stress response, right? That's, I want to fight this, I want to run from this, or I'm going to freeze and shut down. The hormones that mitigate the stress response is cortisol and adrenaline. And we need cortisol and adrenaline when we are in a true emergency. And so we're thankful that our bodies and our brains are capable of providing that for us. The problem with the stress response is that when we're in it all the time, it begins to break the body down. It impacts our immune system. It has all kinds of impacts. You know, with the impacts of stress at all levels of your being. So stress response is our go-to quite often, but we are never ever meant to be in it all the time. What many people don't know about the stress response is that for as smart as we are and as amazing as the brain does not know the difference between a real threat and thinking about a threat. So if I'm walking down a dark alley and I sense that someone is behind me and is coming closer and closer, and my radar goes off. You're in danger, you're in danger, and I'm getting ready to run and to flee or to fight or whatever it is. That is the appropriate use of my stress response. If I'm laying in bed at night and I'm imagining a scenario where I'm walking down a dark alley and someone is behind me and I'm threatened, my brain does not know the difference between that actually happening and the fact that I'm imagining it happening. Now, can you imagine all of the things that we lay in bed thinking about, worrying about, all of the various scenarios that we run through our mind in sort of an imaginary way, the what if, worst case scenario, things that we really, really worry about. Our bodies and our brains think that that's actually happening, which is why we can be in stress response 24/7. So it's really important for us to be very mindful of our imaginings when we're sort of going down that pathway of imagining what might happen, and really, really getting caught up in that. We have to be mindful about that. The other option we have is what's called the pleasure reward response. I don't like what's happening. Something is making me feel really uncomfortable. What am I going to do as a human being? Like most human beings, I might seek pleasure and reward to replace the discomfort that I'm feeling. Classic example of that. I'm uncomfortable. I don't like how I'm feeling. I'm going to go to the refrigerator and grab my favorite comfort food, and our gravitation towards it during times of stress when we're uncomfortable is our pleasure reward response. And the reason that it works is that it creates lots of dopamine. And dopamine is like putting a big warm blanket around you. You just feel so soothed and so comforted when dopamine is present. The problem with the pleasure reward response is that that dopamine wears off, and then you're back to square one. You're back to the discomfort. The pleasure reward response is truly what gets triggered in a person who is dealing with addiction. I feel a lot of discomfort here. I don't know how to cope with these feelings. I can hardly bear to feel this way. I'm going to go to that pleasure reward, that substance, that activity, whatever it is. I'm going to take that in. I'm going to be engaged in that activity. The dopamine feels like the warm blanket, cutting me off from the discomfort. And then the dopamine is going to recede. And then I'm back to the discomfort. So it shouldn't surprise us. And we all have our own addictive tendencies. But I want you to think about, over the course of the last 10, 12 weeks, I've lost count, where your neurological system has gone when you were feeling really threatened and upset by this global pandemic and everything that has come along with it. Did you go to stress response? Did you go to pleasure reward response? I've been seeing a lot of, and this is mostly through social media, people talking about how much alcohol they've been consuming over the course of the last 10 to 12 weeks in kind of a joking way. But that's another example of something we might seek out for comfort and then find ourselves seeking it a little more often because of the dopamine response. So we have to be careful. Again, pleasure reward response, we all do it. We just have to keep it in check, because when we start to do it all the time, we're going to get into that negative loop. But there is a third option. The difference between the first two options and the third option is that the third option is the one that we have to train ourselves into. And it's called the tend and befriend response. But before we do that, I'm kind of curious about what you're thinking about, or what any of this made you think about.
You ladies are first.
Go for it.
I so I don't really have any specific thoughts in general, but I guess like my natural response is more towards like the cortisol response,
Yeah.
more so than the dopamine one, just based on some of the things that you were talking about.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that like every time your brain is worrying or you're thinking about something, even though you might not feel stress, your body is. So that's something for me because I probably am always in cortisol attack.
It's that, with that knowledge can be a real game changer, because when you start to become aware of how often you're kind of thinking worst case scenario, I like to use the word catastrophizing. I catastrophize. I do this. You give me the smallest little bit of a what if, and I'm off to the races with it. I will blow it completely out of proportion if I'm not nipping it in the bud. Just knowing that you do this, just like what I just, you heard me, you can't unhear that. So that's going to stay with you. And these practices can really override that response. But it's what we do. It's what we do. We do not like to feel discomfort, suffering, pain, and we will do whatever we can to alleviate it, even if it's not healthy for us. Someone else?
I mean, I guess with the cortisol stuff, I do that too. And it ends up being like, sometimes I'll be like sore or something because I get so like worked up about it. I'm like flexing my muscles, or I get a headache because I've been clenching my jaw or something like that.
Absolutely. And that cortisol, because that mind is thinking that worst case scenario, right, is the reason that you've got the tension there. It has mustered up so much energy in you. You are so ready to go, to fight it, to run from it, to freeze and shut down, and yet you're not expending it. So it's just getting locked up.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mike?
I've been studying cortisol, and I read a bunch of books on what was the one on oxytocin a couple years ago that I really enjoyed. I have to go back to those, but I think Mary, we were actually talking about it this weekend with Paul. Like when you exercise for more than, I used to run a lot and play basketball and all these things, and I had found that when I go over like 45 minutes, like I would do an hour, 2 hours running marathons and everything, that your body then fills up with cortisol. And I realized years ago, like how damaging it is, like, cause it's stress, so stress, physical or mental. So, to try to find a balance, but, that going back to, I like how you define compassion, because when you think about it, we talk a lot about empathy, like trying to understand how somebody else feels. But you could say that, but until you really have compassion for them, you can't really have that empathy, if that makes sense.
Well, yes, you're right. Mm-hmm.
And I never thought of it that way, but I mean, compassion, the way you defined it there, is stronger than empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see where it does make you feel good and full of oxytocin, because if you could get to that point where the next level is, my guess, of empathy is really having compassion for people's feelings, as much as you may disagree with them, is probably beneficial, because then it lowers everybody's cortisol. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's exactly where I'm going with this.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, but I think one of the things I just want to highlight about what you said is many people who work out that hardcore do not have the realization that they're actually doing damage, because they have now put their body into a state where it believes it has to survive, that it's threatened in some way. And so, as you said, finding that balance is really important, because that's not sustainable. It's not sustainable to be engaged in that kind of activity. Now, what's also interesting about it is that, like, sort of a really intense spurt of exercise or movement, some kind of movement, can actually release the cortisol and the adrenaline that's been built up. It's one of the reasons why for many of us after we exercise, I know for me, especially during these last 10 or 12 weeks, after I do anything physical, I literally feel like I have a different head. My mind is very different. And it's because I have dispersed. Did I talk about the shaking out? You know, like the animals in the wild, once they've protected themselves against threat of predator, many of them by completely shutting down and playing dead, afterwards they will get up and they shake as if they're having a convulsion. They look like they're having a convulsion, but they're shaking off the stress hormone. And then they're just going on their way. And that is why I just heard that a title of a book this weekend, something like Why Zebras Don't Have Heart Attacks. You know, because animals have the ability, they have the intuitive knowledge to know that I've got to shake this off. And we would benefit greatly if we gave ourselves permission to literally shake ourselves. Shake the stress hormone out. Yeah. So let's look at tend and befriend, because now we're going to get into the neuroscience of compassion. So tend and befriend, the discomfort comes up. I'm aware of it because I'm mindful, as are you. Okay, discomfort is here, suffering is here, I don't like what is happening. Rather than trying to fight it, run from it, freeze or shut down, going to the refrigerator or doing whatever it is that I do to seek pleasure, reward, I'm going to tend to it in a friendly manner. So the image that I like to use is you are with a child who's learning to ride a bike for the first time. And they're falling and getting up, falling and getting up, falling and getting up, falling, busting open his knee. You run over to the child. You tend to the child. You tend to the child's suffering. And you do it in a kind, tender, loving way. So you are offering compassion. When you are in a state of suffering or discomfort or feeling edgy or whatever it is that you're feeling that you just wish you weren't feeling, this is here. I'm going to tend to it. I'm going to acknowledge it, and I'm going to tend to it in a way that is not judgmental, that is not critical, that is not bullying, but in a friendly way. When you can do that for you, you begin to generate the oxytocin and serotonin. So the oxytocin, as you know, because this has come up before, is affectionately known as the bonding hormone, the cuddle hormone. Lots of oxytocin gets generated in a human embrace, especially if it's sustained. The average human embrace is about 2 to 3 seconds. To really get oxytocin flowing should be about 45 seconds, which most people, when they hear that, especially if they're in a relationship and they've been in the relationship for a long time, get fear in their eyes, like 45 seconds. That seems like a long time. But when you are front-to-front contact with another human being, heart-to-heart, in an embrace, it's one of the reasons why holding a pet, holding a baby is so relaxing. The presence of oxytocin creates a very clean, not addictive sense of comfort and stability, like a softness and a vulnerability. It makes you more willing to be open and intimate. But what's really important about tend and befriend as a neurological option to your stress, it will never, ever drain you. Stress response will drain you. It will take from you. Pleasure reward response over time will drain you. It will deplete you. Not tend and befriend. It will nurture and nourish you. It will repair your central nervous system. And if you've lived for a long time in stress response, or if you've had some periods of time in your life that you know you were in stress response for a couple of months, you know, like something really difficult, even these last 10 to 12 weeks, your central nervous system has taken a beating. And the way you want to think about the central nervous system is the way you want to think about the electricity in your house. The electricity in your house is connected to and charges everything that we need to survive. And you know how you feel when the lights go out, especially when they go out at night. It's very disorienting. You can't find your way. The things in your house that need energy to support your life are cut off from that energy. Just like when the central nervous system of your body is depleted, or when parts of it, the power is turned off because of chronic stress, our organs, our glands, our brain, the major systems of the body don't get the charge that they need to have you able to function at an optimal level. And so if you can start tending and befriending now when you're having discomfort, as opposed to going into stress response or going into pleasure reward response, you can start to repair that central nervous system that over the years may have taken a real beating. So again, compassion is good for everyone. It can really help you to repair the central nervous system. And as a result of that, you begin to feel renewed energy. The word that I like to use is a sense of vitality, a sense of the life force. For our practice today, I want to guide you through something that I just call the tend and befriend practice. We'll probably be in it for about 5 to 7 minutes. When we come out of it, I'll tell you why it's important, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about how you can do a version of this practice in a moment, like when you need it, like at a moment's notice, and also how you can use it in your own, like when I teach this, I like to recommend that over the course of like between now and the next time we see you, that you would consider using this as your daily practice. Because the more you do this, you're really, really building up your musculature for compassion, and you're infusing your own body with the presence of the oxytocin and the serotonin, which is going to completely override the cortisol and the dopamine. Okay? So before we do that, I just have a question. How do you feel about the science stuff?
I think it's interesting.
Nina?
I think it's interesting. It's weird. Like, I just imagine them like doing a lot of MRIs and stuff to figure it out.
A lot of MRIs and a lot of blood testing. Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So I started studying like the neurosciences as a, I don't want to say a hobby, but just as an interest back in like 2003, 4, and in 2005, I took an executive education class at Harvard on it. So so in our industry, people say like, oh, don't be greedy, don't be fearful. And it's really easy to say. And I learned that, wow, you could ask people not to do that, and you could ask yourself not to do that, but you just do. So
Yeah.
I learned all about like how we're programmed, you know. So basically, if you think about it, like cortisol strikes because way back when hundreds of thousands of years ago or whatever, if like a lion or tiger was going to eat you, it's good to have that spike, because that means like, be afraid or get out of here or you're going to be eaten. On the other hand, so when people see their stocks say go down, they have the same feeling like, oh, this is going to kill me. So it's not that the fear strikes them, but it's actually like these chemicals. And Mary and Nina have experienced this, I'm sure, during this pandemic. You could give people data and information, and the same when they're greedy and they're full of dopamine. And all their friends and they say, we're going to get rich if we do this. You could say, well, let's be careful, calm down. The data says not doing this. So I was always kind of infatuated as why we cannot pay attention to the data.
Yeah.
Information. And it's no one's fault. It's just like all these chemicals are going off in our head. So I'm super, super interested in what you're presenting there. And it's always been like an interest of mine. I don't mistake that I know anything about it. It's just cursory that, okay, that helped me understand it, but I'm not an expert or anything, but I'm very interested.
Yeah, good. Mary, anything?
So I find it interesting too, from a standpoint of it adds, like, sometimes I think it might be easy for people to say, like, to brush off a lot of this and say that they don't understand it, or that it doesn't help them, or that, like, it's not something that we're all going through in one way or another. Or some people might think like, oh, well, I'm already like calm enough, or I do this or I do that. But it adds like the extra layer of realizing like the science behind what the body is doing that we don't even know about, that we need to take care of. So like, if I think about it just from this session, like on a day-to-day basis, like all of the things that like go through your head that are causing harm to your body, that if you can work on that, like, you'll be mentally healthier, physically healthier, more compassionate towards others. Like, I guess it all comes down to like, people don't know what they don't know, and the science really like backs that up for people to maybe like take it more seriously or understand it.
Yeah, the reason I asked the question is because what I have found is including the neuroscience, and this isn't something that we've always done. I think it's something we're doing increasingly more, is a game changer for a lot of people who might come in saying, oh, well, of course, compassion is a good thing, but not really knowing why. And then once you know why, it almost legitimizes the practices in some way. And Mike, I can't even imagine, and I don't know how extensive, your training was and your delving into this was, but even just a small amount of information about this, I imagine had to really sort of transform your understanding of working with people and money. And the ups and downs.
I probably read 25 books on it.
Yeah.
From Kahneman and Tversky. One book is just on oxytocin, and it goes into all these like weddings in India as people are getting married and they're measuring their levels and they're spiking and holding babies. And if during a wedding, we joked about this, once the levels that weren't spiking, it wasn't going to work, right?
Yeah.
So, like if you're getting married and on that right altar and your oxytocin's not spiking up, you've probably got some issues. But I think Mary and Nina probably knows, like, I'm a big believer in trying to avoid extreme ideologies on any side. And because we work hard on trying not to have biases. So all these biases and all these chemicals that go off, people are like either far left or far right, or have all these beliefs and how powerful the narratives are versus data. Like we're narrative driven and story driven, and because those are easy to grasp onto. And so I guess what I've learned through it and some of these is trying to understand myself. And because the one thing is, like, we know that we all lie to ourselves. It's so easy to like to create our own narrative and lie to ourselves. And then we get filled with these biases, and we think that we could identify everybody else's, and we can't because we're looking at them. So what I try to do is say, what are my own? And that's a really, really hard thing to do because you can't see your own most of the time.
Right.
So at least when I did start reading a lot more about this and trying to get into it, it helped you try to understand your own and try to work on those. And it's a really, really hard thing. Like, but at least if you're trying, you're getting somewhere. Most people, as you know, just, oh, that's all bullshit, mindfulness, biases or ideology.
Yeah, yeah.
To me, I mean, they become really disinteresting to me, and I get bored, but that's a bias I have, that I get disinterested in those people. So then I have to work on that and accept them, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, good. Like I said, over the last 3 weeks or so, I'm presenting this content and similar content. I just decided I'm adding in the science. And as I delve more deeply into it, especially the science around self-compassion, which we will not get to today, but that's really powerful.
Yeah.
So I want to share this practice with you, and then we'll talk about it, and then we'll bring the session to a close. Okay. So I want to invite you to come into a comfortable position, and whatever that is for you. I've been also inviting those people who want to turn their camera off and lay down. It's totally up to you. Some of us need a little more rest during this time. So just come into that comfortable seat, always inviting you to close your eyes, although that's always optional. And for this practice, we're actually going to begin by consciously, intentionally relaxing the face, softening through the jaw, softening around the eyes, the temple, forehead. Softening the musculature around the mouth. Inside of the mouth, making sure that the teeth are gently apart and the tongue is loose and relaxed. On your next exhalation, allow your shoulders to relax. And as the shoulders relax, allow the chest, the space of the chest, relax. Few more breaths with each exhalation, just allowing everything to sort of settle down. Relaxing more. Oh, bless you.
Thank you.
Softening more. And I want you to very gently bring to mind something that's been troubling you as of late. Maybe something that's been a burden. Something that's been heavy. Just gently bring it to mind. And I also want to invite you to bring to mind an image of someone that you know who is always supportive. Someone who really loves and supports you. And I want you to imagine that they've just extended their arms in your direction. And they are inviting you to put whatever's been troubling you into their hands. And even if it's just for the next few moments, allow them to take it. To hold it without judgment. And know that they have taken this from you as an act of compassion. And for the next minute or so, notice how it feels to be the receiver of such compassion. Notice how it feels to have let that thing go, whatever it was. Allow yourselves to just rest for a few more moments in the sanctuary and the respite that compassion allows. You've moved out of that stress response. And whenever you're ready, open your eyes. Thoughts?
I almost fell asleep on that one.
Do you know why?
What?
Do you know why?
Did all the cortisol go away?
That we probably did that for about 7 minutes. If you started to feel like you were going to fall asleep, you did create that shift. If cortisol was still really active, it wouldn't let you fall asleep because it needs you to be really alert and on guard. So if you started to relax, began that shift, which is what I wanted to happen. I wanted to use this practice to see how you can make a shift.
So I did it right.
It was successful in you. Anyone else?
Very good.
I don't think I was successful.
Tell me what happened.
So I have a really bad headache today. And
Mm.
I think that like I couldn't get past like the pain in my head to like calm down. Like not like real stress. It's just I couldn't I guess focus as well. I like the underlying themes and messages of the meditation. Like, thinking through everything that you were saying, those are, I think, really helpful like guidelines to think about in general if you're going through a moment of like cortisol, or if you feel like you need a dopamine reaction to something, like to think through like what it is that's causing it, who's supportive to you, and kind of like giving that like feeling of whatever pain it is or whatnot away for a little bit to separate yourself from it. So I really liked the like the wording and the storyline of the meditation.
Yeah. So just to be clear, so we never, ever, ever fail at meditation. Certainly the presence of physical pain can be a distraction to the guidance of the meditation. But I like what you said about first of all, having the awareness of the pain is mindfulness, but also being able to follow along with it and also receive the message of the meditation, which is creating a scenario in your mind. Your mind is believing that this is happening, where you've got this burden or this discomfort, whatever it is, and just temporarily you're placing it in the hands of someone who really loves and supports you. And what's interesting about this meditation is that many people struggle with it because they are masterful at giving compassion, and they often find it difficult to receive it. So it's also a really good training in increasing your capacity to actually receive loving kindness from another person, from another, however you want to think about it, that I was willing to just set this aside into the hands of another person who really cares about me, and then receive compassion, which is going to, again, diminish the presence of the cortisol and the dopamine and start to infuse me with the oxytocin and the serotonin. Mike?
No, I got pleasure and enjoyment, I guess, out of it, like Nina, because I didn't want it to stop.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it really, yeah, whatever chemicals I got, they were good.
Yeah.
I
So
want more. I want more.
one of the things that yeah, that's an interesting point. What happens when we become addicted to meditation, right? One of the cues that I gave was allow yourself for the next few moments to rest, to find sanctuary and respite in compassion. Because if you got to that place where you felt like, oh, this feels really good, I do feel like I'm resting here, I'm finding sanctuary here.
Mm-hmm.
That's the presence of those hormones that are going to restore and repair damage to that central nervous system. And being able to kind of bathe in those hormones on a regular basis, you know, you're going to begin to feel that new sense of energy and vitality if you don't already. So the way that you can use this, if you wanted to, for your daily practice so that you can really start marinating in these hormones, is just as we did. let's say your practice is 5 to 6 minutes at this point, or maybe longer. Just take yourself through the process. I did take a little more time in trying to relax you at the beginning. If you remember, I started with the face. And I like to go there sometimes because most of us don't have any awareness of how much stress and tension we carry in the face. Relaxing the jaw, the eyes, inside of the mouth. When I say make sure the teeth are slightly separated, that's a real awakening for some people who run around clenching their teeth together and wonder why they have jaw pain. Your tongue is a very, very strong muscle. And many of us don't realize that oftentimes the tongue itself is in a state of tension. So just let it go limp and relaxed. We started there, and then okay, let the shoulders start to drop down. So let's create a scenario in the body where we can begin to bring in this troubling thing. I didn't want to bring in the troubling thing if you're already in a state of agitation. So let's calm a bit, bring in the issue, and then bring in this loving, benevolent person. Some people told me this week that for them it's God, whatever it is, here it is, take it. And then just allow, and it'll be different every time, but allow yourself to find some rest in those hormones and in the experience of receiving compassion. Okay? So we are at the end of our time, but I hope you found that helpful. And I really encourage you to practice that. Another way you can use it is if you are in a really difficult moment and you need it in a pinch. Just within yourself, no one even has to know that you're doing it, but within yourself, take yourself back to that imagery. Whatever this is, I'm placing it into the hands of this benevolent person, and I'm going to bring myself into rest.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks.
So I'll see you in 2 weeks, and I think you'll see Jen on Thursday, correct?
Yes.
I think so. Yeah.
All right. All right. Well, have a good evening.
Thank you.
And again, it was good to
Thank
be
you.
here with you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye, guys.
Bye, Mayor. Bye, Dean.